Hi, and welcome to the Improvisors Podcast. I'm Kevin Janes, and this is my co-host, Neil Thomas.
Thank you, Kevin. In the Improvisers Podcast, we talk with performers about their histories, their practices, their conceptualizations around their practices, and how they keep those practices alive and flourishing. Who are we in conversation with today, Kevin?
Today, Neil, we've got the wonderful opportunity to chat to Don ASKER. Don spoke of his current practice of walking and talking. He spoke of walks of wonderment, and he also spoke of the poet Judith Wright and the five senses.
Don talked of art as a navigational tool, the importance of risking and daring, and the many ways of knowing. Hope you enjoy this conversation with Don ASKER as much as we did.
Yes, let's go.
A huge welcome to our today's special guest, Don ASKER. Don, I wonder if we might start today with a very broad question. How might you describe yourself? And it can be within the context of your history or the last half an hour. Would you be willing to give that a go?
Yes, part of me, Neil, and thanks for the welcome indeed. Part of that would be in keeping with my joker, insincere quality that I have acquired for our esteemed friend Andrew. But Andrew Morris's sort of influence on jokerism has permeated my being. So I think I've gradually become aware of my tendency to be a font of knowledge, and I've tried to take that off my shoulder. It's been a big burden for my life, and be a bit more foolish. So I think I would say perhaps I'm evolving to be a better fool, and I like that. It seems that people feel more able to trust me as a fool than they did as a pretender of knowledge, and it also enables me to shed that desire to control things, which, as a young dancer, even as a scientist once, I thought, you could approach some degree of definiteness, knowledge, and so I tended to look for that, and I chose to sort of direct creative processes, and I realized after a long time that probably wasn't the best way to go, and so that's become part of me, and I think the idea of being the island, has always been in there. Myself as sort of somewhat isolated, proved to be not particularly useful in a life, and even though I am a little bit isolated here in the country, I am in the country totally loving that kind of conversation with it all, and of course that seems to have a sense of collaboration about it, a sort of a dialogue. I've used that word conversation with a few people of late, that sense of being in ongoing conversation. And I suspect that it is in that area of sort of relationality, that kind of connecting to things and places and people. And I've found that a degree of hope and also freedom. Yeah.
Don, we're so excited today. Firstly, to chat with you. I just wanted to say that we're getting keenly looking forward to this. I want to acknowledge your land at Kia and the extended duration that both you and Jane had, that relationship with the land over time, and how I guess that has shaped your practices and shaped the land, and that sort of mutuality is very evident if anybody visits there. It's so evident. But I want to come back to something fairly specific that you wrote in your bio. And it really is coming back to bodies. The way bodies speak and communicate intrigues me, leading to an appreciation of the complexity of our processes of knowing and understanding. And I know that you consider things deeply in these ways, and that I guess it's the relationship with bodies, the relationship between bodies and land, and the relationship between bodies and each other as artists and performers. Um, I'd simply invite you to actually comment on that and sort of dive into it a little bit further. This how the way bodies speak and the way it intrigues you, Don.
Mm, it's a good question, Kevin, um, and I suppose that right now it's timely. I'm a little remiss to sort of acknowledge the UN people and their ownership and custodianship and of the country in which I'm sitting now, um, because I was so fortunate be re to be companioned by some of the local elders and taken into this country. That's been an extraordinary experience as I sort of walked back into it, something that I thought I knew, bush country, well, bush land, the outback. Suddenly, it didn't suddenly happen, but it was an awakening to the way bodily and of course culturally I could suddenly find myself being differently here. So the the speaking to it and out from that, the 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 ways of connecting to it took on different proportions, I suppose I'm saying. And when you remind me of what I sort of said about that bodily immersion, that bodily knowing, um, it was a kind of an acknowledgement of the way we know and can know so differently and with beyond the scope of words, but through that tangible, haptic, that sensing way of being in one's environment. So when BJ Cruz took me for this walk for several days, in fact, so generously, I felt myself in some ways um, going and connecting in ways that I couldn't really give words to. Um, Even as he um, noticed and pointed to the various things that were valuable and under sort of resourceful for his people, he was also highlighting a, a kind of connection that was less easily tangible. It was inseparable from body. So my sense of body and the dancer's body and the body of the moving artist, the gesturing stuff, uh, and the skillful stuff that we have as bodies, uh, expanded in those terms. Um, yeah, being in place wasn't just the way I arranged my limbs or sat or ran my hands through the detritus on the forest floor or picked up an implement from the. It was something more than that. And I don't know what that really is. And that's the wonderful thing, I think, of my life at the moment, that um, it's better and safer to acknowledge that I don't know and to look for those little moments between the certainties, the sound of that wonga pigeon's noting, and sense little openings, little gaps to something other in that moment, in this moment, that next moment. The um, my body connected as I now understand it to everything around me is in that moment a physicality, but it's standing in front of things that I don't know, I'm not really answering your question, Kevin. I'm being sorry.
It makes a lot of sense, Don. In a way, of course, trying to be articulate about the inarticulate. That's what I was thinking, and I thought it was got me there, got me into that place of thinking about different kinds of knowings. And I suppose you're talking about your own knowings, your knowings on land, and somehow the knowings that have been passed from another walking through the land, your time on land, that it's beyond or beneath or beside words, language, and articulation, another realm of being. And I was wondering, how does that get transferred to another? How does that get communicated? How does that very sort of important set of knowings become communicated? I was hoping you had the answer.
I don't know that I've got the answer, but it's a question actually that has preoccupied me. And I've actually, kind of verbalized that very same question. It fascinates me and it seems an important thing to address. So Kevin is a little aware, because we did do a little walk or two together, of something that's happening at the moment. My sense of a practice has constantly involved sharing, and sharing with that sort of purpose in mind that you have sketched, because I sense that this way of connecting can be a vital thing. I mean, it points us into those notions of sustainability. It points us to ways that we might feel more whole or develop things like empathy or responsibility beyond just the materiality of our day-to-day existence. And so of late, I've started a practice of walking and talking, and I'd like to share it. So it's one method of moving towards this state of being that I feel has been very valuable to me. It's a sort of a loose abandonment in the act of walking to what catches your attention or my attention. So it's about attending to within and without in the course of moving in this somewhat natural, less colonized parts. And verbalizing is part of that in some ways, or more broadly sounding. So for an outsider, not part of the companioning pair, walking, hiding in the bush, they might sense that there's a couple of wonga pigeons, or there is a samba deer honking over there. It's me. I'm just sort of letting it out a bit, and it is spontaneous in a way, the sort of signals that come from, and they're in response to what's around. And it's sort of that sense of blurring inner self with that's around, including the conversing other, including my companion, whoever that is. And allowing that to be there, but also to be expressed sometimes poetically and sometimes nonsensically or sometimes foolishly, so that these things just are little markers, along with the body that's much more ephemeral and keeps walking or turning or twisting or pausing or getting tired and feeling hot and exhausted or whatever. So there tends to be a dancing going on in the physical self, the listening self, the attending, connecting self. So that's one way, Neil, to answer in a long way what might be possible in terms of sharing this. I mean, other ways have just And I suppose when we look back at the Romantic poets, the people who wandered around the Lake District had to get out there, that mentally, emotionally crippled, looking for some relief, and finding it, and then expressing it poetically at times. And maybe through that act of socially speaking it out, their lives were continued. They were supported by perhaps the readership or whatever it is. And so there's something quite, for me, a little bit parallel. There is something hopeful in what this sharing does. It's a healing thing because for some reason or other, that seems to escape a lot of us a lot of the time, there's something incredibly healing in this grounding of ourselves in the more natural world.
Don, I'm wondering a little about the word performance in this context, but I'm also I know in our chats leading up to this, there was a bit of a reticence for us to we use the word improvisation too much, or for you to overly identify as an improviser. But when you spoke about your walking practice and the sort of spontaneous emergence of words, language, sound, relationally,
Mm.
and that being really integral, that sort of emergence of relational material on the go, less controlled, more spontaneous. It feels so central to your practice, and in many ways to your living on the land from having visited you there. Be good if you could just talk a little bit more about where performance starts to sit within or outside of this domain, or is it a type of performing relational being that you are sort of immersed in exploring?
In a way, I find those two the question of Neil's before and yours really important, and the kind of idea of how does one share that sort of experience and that ways of potentially knowing differently, and how that sits as performance, or the degrees to which there is an element of performance in there are interesting puzzles for me, and sort of parts of a bigger jigsaw that I don't really know much about. But I can speak to a sort of a sense of difference about performance for me, because as a kind of conservative, or well, a performance maker, a theatrical presenter, or even a installation artist, there can be, for me, degrees of separation of those engaged in the making from what is presented. And I think what intrigues me is the conversation between both, and indeed in the ways in which we all can collaborate in the moments of what I'll now go back to calling sharing rather than performance. And it's part of that desire not to know too much, because that might be a little bit egotistic. I'd rather remain in the full camp more, because it takes it takes it takes some of the separation between others and me away. I don't really want to perform to, I want to perform with. So we can all come together, and it's in maybe a heightened state of call it awareness for now, but we might even frame this moment or this half hour or this walk as special. And in doing that, we switch on a few more buttons of a sensory kind, perhaps, or even open up the door to our imagination having a bit more opportunity. So, yeah, there is a specialness perhaps in the occasion, but perhaps I am in this stage of my kind of creative life or whatever you want to call it. I shouldn't have mentioned that word. But at this stage, I feel it's incredibly wonderful to do these walkings with and these events of discovery and question making and wonderment. Yeah, walks of wonderment. That's a good word. I think that's where it lies. So, along with the idea of improvisation, performance also has sort of degrees of complexity, which are now there to be unraveled a little bit more. It's not that the words don't exist for me, but um, maybe it needs a prefix like co-performance, or maybe it is about um, a way in which people can be together. Look, I can sort of point to the models in some indigenous cultures where there is no separation of oh, people are different, but the events are more participatory um, than maybe we tend to make them in our Western cultures. So, yeah, I haven't mentioned the word improvisation much, but spontaneity is part of that because I suppose if the idea of surprising oneself is to be there, if the idea of going where we haven't been before or into those things of wonderment, some of our ways of previously recognizing things have to be put to one side a little bit. So there is an idea of, well, what am I going to put in this space? And maybe I have to improvise to allow some other things in. So the space becomes dynamic and in flux, space-time. And perhaps that's how I now understand improvising to a degree.
That sounds like a throw.
Yeah. Mm.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Sign me up for the next walk. It makes so much sense. I've been thinking about conversation and different kinds of conversations we have. And there's a kind of conversation where the person's really keen, or I'm really keen on telling you something. I've got something that I want to tell you. I want to persuade you. I want you to buy my vacuum cleaner. I want you to know that I'm a clever guy. I have an agenda that I want to push out there, and I will not give in around that. I want to dominate the field, my point of view. On the one extreme, which occurred to me while you were talking, sounds a lot like colonization. And then on the other side, there is the conversation, which is free-flowing conversation where we're all in it together. And it feels like there's something in the middle, the three of us conversing, and there is a fourth, which is the three of us together. And that has a life of its own that in a good conversation is gently nurtured and grows in surprising and incredibly interesting and potent ways. So I kind of feel like there's a parallel. Just a comment, I think, not a question.
Yes, no, Neil, it's a very good sort of analogy you're drawing there. I would add into that that there's no judgment felt in me about the impulse to sort of put it out there, to say something, to say this is a very good vacuum cleaner. And to be passionate about it. I think there's something good. I guess it's the space to respond to that offer that's really kind of intrinsic and probably part of our our wish. And at the same time, I guess as you dare to make something felt or said or done, as you dare that, and you are accepting of the response being there but not known, there is a degree of risk. And I love that idea of risk, and risk is a positive thing. I mean, not blind risk that puts self in harm's way, because so we do need to have a few little givens to navigate ourselves. But at the same time, risk seems to be entwined with our curiosity. Are we, if we are seeking to go places that are less known, they may be difficult. They may have a capacity to do things that are unexpected. So there is this risk there. It's a bit sort of like going to Mars, isn't it? But I think I think that the ways of being endlessly evolving for us, and I think everything is constantly coming forward, I suppose. It has its history, it has its sources and its origins, and you can sort of see the little points where something proved to be unuseful, not useful, dangerous, unhelpful, pedantic, as you're saying, maybe colonizing and authoritarian and ultimately destructive or abusive. But the sort of the edginess that's around all of that hopefully allows us to be better, to adjust. Yeah.
Maybe pick up on something that Neil mentioned about that sort of continuum between the vacuum cleaner salesperson and the other end. And I'm really interested in expression versus presentation. And I think at that end of the vacuum cleaner, there's often a sense that performatively people might want to express, and often expression is an expression of the more known things, the things that have already been thought before, the things that have already been known by the person, and there's an attempt to express them in order to share them with others, which is a very valid and useful thing to do, of course, because that's so much a part of performance and theatre in certain ways and in context still. But the other end, where we're available to what presents, that sort of relational, immersive availability for things that are presenting in the moment on the go, where we're not invested in wanting to express something, we're more invested in our availability relationally. And it feels like that's what you're well talking about, Don, that sort of availability to enable things to present and to relationally let them take form and spontaneously, as you've said, versus expression where there's an intention that I'm going to offer something up because I have a purpose to educate, to share, or make comment on. Again, that's more a commentary from me, not a question, but I love your response to that.
Yes, it's a very interesting sort of thought, isn't it? That innate desire, as you say, to share some of the materiality, the gestural, worded understandings that we are standing in time with at the moment, if you like, and how they may be, in a way, devices for us pushing forward. I think that's where expression, from my perspective, becomes so rich and valuable, because we do need these navigating tools. We do need to know something about that love or that loneliness or that opportunity. And it can be a way to just give a pointer towards something that we don't really know a lot about. We have this sort of tacit or kind of hidden sense that it's a bit like, the early black hole theorizing. We suspect it's there. Matter, light's not coming back to us. There's something there or absent, and so the expression can allow that movement of our understanding in whatever way that we choose to sort of have that happen. And you can sort of sense that as being there within lots and lots of those performative realms, solo performers, whatever, where there is something spontaneous occurring. It's got at the back of it some spine to it, which is an inclination towards something not too well understood or known. So there's a kind of a premeditative thing that reflects on sort of difficulties that we have with the current state of play, or something about the values that we are in collision or using. And that's given us, what I would call the backbone to go forward. Don't know whether I'm answering but I like the question. Again, it's not the question, it's just the idea of this being there and how that infects us as creative beings. And that reminds me of my other feeling that word artist is another one that needs to be put on the kind of short list for re-examination. So I'm just highlighting creative being. My dog, she's gone and left me, but she's quite a creative being in many, many ways. So, she can bring the bone to play. She's a great playful animal. And, that idea of, setting things up to a degree. She just dropped a bone on my foot. This is the toy bone. But the way that we as creative beings have an inkling, that's a good word. I think a famous friend of ours called Warren Lett used to talk about inklings. Yeah.
An old friend of mine said that he was very suspicious of three-letter words, and that he thought art was a suspicious word, and so was God. It's occurred to me that dog is also a three-letter word, but they're perhaps not as suspicious. It's interesting. Nominally, I'm supposed to be coming up with a question, and I don't really have one, but I'm interested in you. We've talked a lot about the ideas, but I'm intrigued by the idea of you as island, and you as inquirer, and you as carrying a burden of knowledge. I wonder whether that's a particular type of person. I'll just throw that out.
Yeah, I think we are all people of our circumstance, aren't we? We sort of get shaped a lot by our circumstances, and they can make us islands and they can make us lonely, and I suppose our circumstances can draw us into different places. And I love making sure that I don't forget my own mortality now, and that I'm just walking with a daily awareness of death and the hope that comes with life. So living and dying, sort of co-producing each other. But I suppose for my own self, there is that sense of singularity, but I think humankind as a species is so such a family thing, such a connecting thing. I notice, going back to dogs, that dogs want to be together. They're not very happy at the thought of being on their own, and I feel myself that uh, I'm so lucky to be able to have conversations with people who are close or not close, people who have different um, ways of looking at the world. It's so important. So I don't choose to be an island, but circumstances may make that the case. Uh, I I wouldn't want to remain in my remaining life a sort of an isolated identity that does know a bit. I think my desire to be more foolish hopefully will bring more people to the door than knowing too much. Oh gosh, it's risky, isn't it? The man who knew too much. Yeah, gosh, yeah, it's a terrible thing.
Don, yes, yes, could be a terrible thing. I'm, I'm sort of sitting here, having listened to what you've said so far, and pondering you at Kia on the land and your 30 plus years of immersion on that property. And on the few occasions I've had to visit you and stay up there for a while, I think what's been most pronounced has been a type of sensitization that you have to that which is around you, to your capacity to sort of hear a bird in the distance or catch sight of something in the undergrowth or to see a deer, in the far, far distance. This sort of sensitization that you carry in place, to place, and the way that that shapes you, and it's so apparent to actually stay there for a while with you and notice that. And I'm sort of thinking of that sort of relational dance that exists up there, and the way the land has shaped you, how you've met it, how you've sensitized to it, how you've gradually become a particular type of inquiring being on the land, and it's something I watch with great respect and admiration in a way. And I guess that's sort of commenting a little bit on Neil asking something about your nature. I'd just love you to comment a little bit further, Don, on that sensitization, responsiveness, embeddedness, I guess, in place, and the implications.
Mm. Well, I wish I had Judith Wright's anthology of her poems. I think she wrote one about five senses, and she starts, now I'm in my five senses, and away she goes, and it's beautiful. Well, going back to the 60s, I think, of the 20th century. But there is something in all of us, I think, that, as sensory beings are just extraordinary. And to have them awakened and enlivened um, is, I think, is something that is to all of our advantage. And I would hope for humanity to not forget to kindle that. And I've been privileged to have that kindled in me, just as I said earlier, but the early walkings with Indigenous elder, and I mean, even after even after the big disastrous fires of 2020, where so much of the landscape was just annihilated, and I lost a lot of little treasures. There was that, and the landscape was just black. You could see for kilometers across this black landscape. It was heartbreaking in so many ways, reflective of our colonizing neglect and inability to understand what perhaps country would thrive from, apart from all the damage we've done climate-wise. But just even if we had been more attentive to that landscape. I remember so many acts of great kindness towards the creatures that survived, towards the people that were still there. And that seemed to me to come from that deep gut level understanding that it was important that we were sensitive and connected. Judith was so right when she spoke poetically about the wonderment of being in those alive sensory bodies. And she spoke so poetically about things to do with the heart of our existence in and around that. A sort of a heartfeltness that pointed to something, some capacity as humans that we have for love and resilience and awareness. So for me, I've been really fortunate, to have my eyes sort of and ears and kinesthetic aspects of me enlivened. It's been extraordinary. So I would love to take Neil for a walk in the bush, but it's not even that it's me taking someone for a walk. It's just about us opening ourselves to that possibility. And yeah, it's there. It's a bit like the tree huggers, isn't it? And in Japan, you can pay your dollars and you can go and hug a tree. But there is some benefits, isn't there, it seems. And we probably don't realise quite how that complexly, psychologically, metaphysically sets us up.
It made me think about Socrates and how a lot of his philosophical interactions were walking, just two people walking, and the idea of there's something opening about moving through space. It's not adversarial, and especially with all the senses opened in a large environment, there's something lovely, dynamic, and alive about that.
Can I add to that, Neil? Because there was something that Jane Mortis once said when she was involved in a loosely connected group of people. They called themselves Wild Art, and they would go for walks. So a fairly large horde, big pack, going off into the Pink Woods and other parts of the South Coast. And they actually put together, maybe it was mid-2000s, maybe around about 2009, a program that they took to sort of advocate for, climate awareness. And I know Jane made a piece of sort of action and some video of footsteps walking across a shallow river, and she threw herself against the wall to sort of almost as an attention-catching thing, as a distressed being. And then at the end, she uttered something about stepping lightly. And that sort of offered something to think about. She took her shoes off, I think, and walked out of the space as if to say, our footprints, our kind of presence doesn't need to be heavy. It doesn't need to be, I don't know. It doesn't need to be like jackboots walking to terrify everything and everyone. It was a beautiful thought, and I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's good.
Don, you mentioned Jane Mortis, and who passed away about a year ago. But every time I think of Kia, it's like Don and Jane, or Jane and Don coexisting. And I'll use the word art or artists, in that risky word. But there's as artists, I think of the most remarkable order existing on the land and in a daily way, generating art, the sort of art of living, relating, being, giving form to considerations, being informed by considerations. It's such a remarkable life, I think, that you and Jane generated up there around the land, around a large studio that was central to your both of your work for a while, which burnt down during those bushfires. But I guess I'm just acknowledging the sort of the artists that you were and that you are, and the particularities of your approach in place over time. I've always found it deeply inspiring and moving, and always stretching me personally beyond notions of performance and notions of art making, and that which emerged relationally in situ there. It's it's remarkable. It's just a confirmation, but I'd invite you to speak a little bit further about maybe the work that you and Jane had done over time, or just the notions of artistic practice in situ in Kia.
I think the arrival of a building to house to be a hub for practice didn't mean that we migrated to the building, but it was lovely to be able to reflect on what might happen outside, and to even notice how it felt to be inside was quite important. I do remember not just Jane, but other people, coming in with your favourite red-bellied black snake skin, not the creature, just the shed skin, and the various sort of hangings and of things printed and footprints gathered and fallen nests to marvel at. So it became a kind of laboratory there, and some extraordinary people did come there to have some time in that environment. And when Jane passed a year ago, I do remember the kind of gratitude that was reflected from some of those previous visitors. It was really felt. You could feel it. They came for her memorial. They sent little cards about it. So the idea of it being useful in a broader scale than just for myself is reflected in that. But I suppose there have been advocates for walking and being in nature for many, many decades and centuries. I think what happened at Kaya is just another example of what's possible, and how enriching that can be. I mean, again, it was more privileged and a kind of construct to which we hope others are grateful. It's more just that we had that privilege of having the capacity to keep that space open. Land like this is disappearing so fast. So there were parts of it that were heavily colonized. There are paddocks with animals in it and whatever, but there were gullies that you could walk into and feel the ruggedness, the slipperiness of the stones, the dry creek beds, the way life vicariously existed in these sorts of places, and beautifully existed. So yeah, we know that there are some beautiful forests and beautiful beaches and estuarine places, and I suppose the hope is that they will continue to be there, and we will hang on to those sorts of spaces and opportunities. And I remember after the fires, I remember that the kind of thought, did linger of, is there such a thing as recovery? And I think it's a question for the planet. We can look at just a massive fire on the east coast of Australia in 2020 and wonder how the environment and people will bounce. But the bigger question is the global question of that's sort of the product of our assumptions and presumptions about infinite resources, or our human, rights to the resources, and the implications for a rapidly drying earth. I mean, they're big, big questions, serious questions, I suppose. And that's perhaps what, one of the sorts of things that sits in my belly a little bit. It's not the only thing. I, do look at our ways of relating human to human. They're all tied together, aren't they? They're all a complex bundle.
Big sigh. I think we've sort of hit that time where it's time to finish, Don, to kind of wrap it up. And just to say what a wonderful man, and what a wonderful expression you've been part of with us today. So to thank you deeply from our hearts. And I wonder whether there was just one final inkling sitting there for you that we could float.
Well, the lasting thing is the sense of pleasure in having a chat with you. I mean, the sense that there are people like yourselves who are able to commit for all sorts of reasons to ensuring that we go on talking and finding ways to, understand our creative urges or our need to interact in these sort of performative ways. I think that gives me a sense of hope. And so I really come back to thank you guys for making our chat happen. It's been a wonderful opportunity, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Don, I'm going to take a small risk after we're heading towards the end. Well, maybe a big risk, but we're both well aware of your long history of as a dancer, as a choreographer, as an academic, if that word is meaningful now, as an artist. Through many iterations, and you've been very influential in the world of dance and art making. I'm going to go back to that dangerous word art, and I'm wondering at this time in this life, Don, what is art for you? I wonder, what is art? You willing to indulge in that, or would you rather put that three-letter word down and walk away?
Well, it's a bit of as Neil noticed, it's a bit like dog. I mean, it's a dog of a word. But I must admit that I have been, this is a confession time. I have been remarking to myself on some of the paintings of Rubens, the etchings of Bruegel, the elder, in several conversations I've had in the last few weeks. And they've been incredibly stimulating to revisit, to see the fleshy forms of Rubens, and to think of the incredible societies that Bruegel the elder was trying to bring to life in, gobsmacking lithographs or etchings. I mean, so as sort of historical reference points, it seems art is absolutely important for us to have as a navigating tool. to remind us of the way our ancestors looked at each other and the kind of worlds that they were battling in or exploiting or fighting or whatever in. And I sense that in these moments of what now or what's beckoning, that art is there too. It sort of opens up some of those dark windows and doorways that we mentioned earlier. So I think, although I might have been referring to a more participatory kind of communal expression, it's just that our art sits within community, and we at times negate that or forget that. And you get these, what do they call them, blockbuster exhibitions, and people just put the remote down for a moment and go in. But it is so important that we feel drawn in, and maybe just give it a little bit more time as well.
Thank you, Don. We could spend so long together. I think the three of us just inquiring, teasing out. But as Neil so clearly made mention before, the end has come. We need to finish the podcast. So thank you so much, Don, for your availability today and your openness of response and your remarkable way, I think, of detailed way of being so considered in the world.
Well, I want to say again, and I'm repeating myself, but a big thank you to you two. It's a significant thing that you're doing and have done. I take my hat off to you. Well, lost it. The dog ate it.